I said, you know, I'll be happy if it's just Buddy Holly. Um, I appreciate it, and I'm honored that I'm going to be there too, but my thought right away was, it's enough with Buddy's name in there.
He was only 22 when his plane fell from the sky. But what if Buddy Holly never actually died in that crash? What if the story we've been told for over 6 decades was nothing but a cover-up? Hidden away in a locked storage unit in Nebraska was a box no one was supposed to find. Inside, a reel-to-reel tape labeled BH Final, containing a message so disturbing that even the FBI was alerted. The voice on that tape? It wasn't a goodbye. It was a warning. And it wasn't just about music. In the months before his accident, Buddy had cut ties with major labels, filed secret paperwork to launch a rogue publishing company, and told close friends he feared he was being followed. And when a strange man with a scar appeared at his final show, only to vanish right before the crash, the conspiracy deepened. The real reason Buddy Holly died has never been aired publicly. Until now. Buddy Holly wasn't supposed to change the world. He was born Charles Hardin Holly in 1936 in the dry, dusty town of Lubbock, Texas, a place more familiar with sermons than showbiz. He was the youngest of 4 kids in a working-class family where music was a pastime, not a profession. But even as a boy, Buddy was different. He didn't just hum songs, he deconstructed them. He'd listen to Hank Williams or Jimmy Rogers and pick apart every note, then reassemble it in his own voice, his own rhythm, his own rebellion. By his teenage years, he'd traded in his fiddle for a guitar and formed a duo with his friend Bob Montgomery. They played anything the audience would tolerate: bluegrass, gospel, country. But Buddy was always searching for something more dangerous, something with bite, something that felt alive. It was when he heard Elvis Presley live in 1955 that it clicked. The swagger, the swing, the way the music made people lose themselves. Buddy wanted that, but on his terms. He began blending country with rhythm and blues, layering it with twangy guitars and hiccuping vocals that felt strangely futuristic. It wasn't long before he caught the attention of record labels, but even then, Buddy didn't want to play puppet. He wanted control. He wrote his own songs. He arranged his own music. And when the suits at Decca tried to tell him how to sound, he walked. Then came the Crickets. With hits like That'll Be the Day, Oh Boy, and Peggy Sue, Buddy became the face of a musical revolution. But fame didn't sit easily with him. Friends described him as intense, often withdrawn between shows, scribbling lyrics in hotel Bibles or whispering melodies into tape recorders at 3 a.m. He was obsessed with getting it all down. Every song, every sound, like he was racing against a clock only he could hear. The pressure mounted. So did the paranoia. He once told a friend, "If I don't get this music out of me soon, they'll bury it with me." No one understood what he meant, but years later, as the evidence piled up, it started to sound less like poetry and more like prophecy. By the start of 1959, Buddy Holly's career was at a crossroads. He had split from his longtime bandmates, the Crickets, and was deep in debt after a series of legal battles and unpaid royalties. His wife, Maria Elena, was pregnant. His label was pressuring him to conform. And Buddy, more than anything, wanted out. Not just from the deals, but from the entire system. He began speaking quietly with lawyers about starting his own label, a private studio that would operate independently of the major recording networks, a place where no one could censor him, manipulate him, or trap him. But leaving the industry cleanly wasn't that easy. When he joined the Winter Dance Party Tour in January of '59, friends said he seemed exhausted but determined. The tour was grueling. 24 shows in 24 days across the frozen Midwest. The tour bus broke down repeatedly, sometimes leaving the musicians stranded in sub-zero temperatures. People got sick. Morale collapsed. But Buddy pressed forward, driven by something no one could quite put their finger on. Then came Clear Lake, Iowa. February 2nd. After performing at the Surf Ballroom, Buddy chartered a private plane to get to the next venue ahead of schedule. It was a rushed decision, allegedly made to avoid another freezing bus ride. But some claimed he had another reason. He wanted to stop somewhere first. A private meeting with a man in Fargo, North Dakota. The details of that meeting were never made public. Some say it was about money. Others believe it involved something far more sensitive, possibly the final documents related to his breakaway label. Alongside him on the plane were Richie Valens and J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson, both of whom had also been complaining about the tour's conditions. The pilot, Roger Peterson, was young and underqualified for the weather conditions, but the flight took off anyway at around 12:55 a.m. It never reached its destination. What's strange, though, is that early reports from the FAA claimed the crash happened within minutes of takeoff. Yet, a farmer whose land bordered the crash site said he didn't hear a thing until nearly 3 a.m. Stranger still, the flight path didn't match what was filed, and the wreckage suggested something violent had occurred mid-air, not a simple loss of control. Even odder, Buddy's .22 caliber pistol, which he was known to carry for protection, was missing from the scene. It wouldn't be recovered for over a decade, and when it was found miles from the crash site, with the serial number filed off. Maria Elena Holly had only been married to Buddy for 6 months when the news came. She was at home in New York, pregnant and waiting for her husband to return from the winter dance party tour. But instead of a phone call from Buddy, it was a knock on the door. A friend had heard it on the radio. Buddy was dead. Maria Elena collapsed on the spot. Within days, she suffered a miscarriage. The love of her life and their unborn child were gone in a matter of hours. But the grief hadn't even set in when the strange visits began. 2 sharply dressed men, who she later said were not law enforcement, showed up at her apartment just 48 hours after the crash. They said they were representing the label. They asked for access to Buddy's recordings, his songwriting notebooks, and any personal items related to his music. When she refused, they told her it would be in her best interest to cooperate. They reminded her that Buddy had died while under contract, and anything he'd worked on belonged to them. Maria Elena stood firm. She later claimed those men were never identified, and no one would tell her who sent them. Within weeks, she stopped receiving Buddy's royalty checks. When she tried to fight it, she was told her name wasn't on the right paperwork. Her voice was erased from the estate, her access cut off. Buddy's parents weren't spared either. His father, Lawrence Holly, demanded a second investigation. The funeral had been rushed, the autopsy brief. When he asked for Buddy's body to be re-examined, his request was flatly denied. He began to suspect something deeper had gone wrong. Then came the phone calls, soft, eerie voices warning him to drop it. Sometimes they'd call in the middle of the night and hang up as soon as he answered. Other times, they'd whisper things like, "You're not supposed to know." And then, in 1961, 2 years after the crash, Buddy's older brother Larry reported a break-in at his home. Nothing was stolen, except one thing: a box of reel-to-reel demo tapes Buddy had mailed to him before the tour. Those tapes were never recovered. To this day, no official investigation has ever addressed the missing music, the altered legal arrangements, or the mysterious men who showed up at Maria Elena's door. But if Buddy's family was being silenced, the question remained, what were they being silenced about? Buddy Holly's music didn't die in 1959, but his voice, in many ways, was stolen. In the weeks after the crash, the media began painting a sanitized version of his legacy. He was framed as the clean-cut kid in glasses, a soft-spoken genius who politely revolutionized rock and roll. And while some of that was true, it was a carefully curated truth, stripped of its edges, scrubbed of its rebellion. The real Buddy Holly wasn't a polite puppet of the record industry. He was starting to become one of its loudest critics. What few people knew at the time was that Buddy had been growing increasingly disillusioned with the way the music business operated. In the final months before his death, he had quietly cut ties with his original manager, Norman Petty, after discovering financial discrepancies. He was angry, betrayed, and determined to take back control. Buddy had been drawing up paperwork to launch his own independent label, one where artists wouldn't be owned, one where music could be raw, political, and personal. And then came the songs. Buddy had begun experimenting with themes that made his handlers uncomfortable. Friends recall him working on lyrics about corruption in radio, the exploitation of black artists, and his distrust of the men behind the curtain. One unreleased track, allegedly titled "The Machines," hinted at a world where the music industry operated more like a surveillance state than a business. His final studio sessions, held in secrecy, were recorded on tape reels he kept locked in a fireproof box. At least 6 songs from those sessions were never released. Buddy had told close friends he would debut them after the tour, without label approval. That never happened. After his death, the record label scrambled to control the narrative. They re-released old tracks, published a rushed greatest hits album, and began limiting access to his unreleased material. Producers who worked with him were pressured to keep quiet. One engineer even claimed that a man from New York came and took 2 reels from the studio vault the day after the crash. The more Buddy tried to escape the system, the more tightly it seemed to close in around him. And after his death, it didn't just take his life. It repackaged his legacy into something safer, something the industry could control. But one question lingered in hushed corners of recording studios and dusty archives. Was Buddy Holly about to blow the whistle on something much darker than bad contracts and unpaid royalties? By the early 2000s, whispers around Buddy Holly's death had grown into quiet investigations. One name rose above the rest: L.J. Kuhn, a self-proclaimed aviation expert who began challenging the original crash report. Kuhn insisted that the official explanation, a simple case of pilot error in poor weather, didn't add up. According to him, the plane's angle of impact and the position of the bodies suggested something far more sinister, that Buddy may have already been injured, or even dead, before the aircraft hit the ground. The original autopsy on Buddy had been minimal. No full forensic analysis, no toxicology report, just a rushed burial and a closed case. Kuhn filed formal petitions to exhume Buddy's body for a proper investigation. He believed a second look could reveal trauma inconsistent with a crash, perhaps even a bullet wound. Then came something even more disturbing. During Kuhn's private research, he uncovered a document in the Civil Aeronautics Board archives, one that referenced a weapon-related concern tied to the Holly crash. It mentioned an object found near the wreckage that was not logged in public reports. Around the same time, a small-town museum in Minnesota received an anonymous donation, a .22 caliber pistol inside a sealed box labeled "Do Not Reshelve." The serial number had been filed off. The pistol matched the model Buddy was known to carry on tour. Kuhn tried to trace the gun's origin, but hit dead ends. Witnesses who remembered Buddy carrying the pistol said they were never questioned. One bandmate, Waylon Jennings, who'd given up his seat on the doomed plane, once hinted that things were never what they seemed that night, but never elaborated. Meanwhile, Maria Elena quietly expressed support for the idea of an exhumation. In a rare interview, she said, "If something unnatural happened to Buddy, I would want the world to know. But some doors, once opened, never close." Despite mounting evidence and public curiosity, Kuhn's petition was ultimately denied by the NTSB. No reason was given. One aviation expert remarked, off the record, that the case was politically untouchable. Another FAA official told Kuhn, "You're digging in a graveyard the industry paved over a long time ago." And buried in that graveyard might be the truth. A truth that's been quietly kept 6 feet under for over 60 years. The last man to ever see Buddy Holly alive might have been a janitor, a man no one thought to interview for decades. His name was Earl Jenkins, and in 2003, he came forward with a story that shook the foundation of everything people thought they knew about that final night. Earl had worked cleanup at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa, for over 20 years. He was there that night, sweeping up cigarette butts in the hallway, when he overheard an argument near the backstage door. According to Earl, Buddy wasn't alone. He was in a heated exchange with 2 men in dark coats, neither of whom looked like musicians or crew. One had a scar running from the corner of his mouth to his neck. The other was holding a briefcase. Earl couldn't hear everything, but he caught Buddy's voice. Loud, firm, angry. "I said no," Buddy barked. "You can't own it. I'm not signing anything." The next morning, Buddy was gone. Jenkins told a local journalist his story. He mentioned that Buddy looked scared that night, not just tired or stressed, but scared. That interview was never published. Just 2 weeks later, Jenkins's house burned to the ground. He died inside. The official cause of the fire was listed as accidental, though no source was found. His daughter, Mary, told reporters that her father had recently moved a box of old photos and documents into a locked cabinet. Photos, he said, were from that night. The box was never recovered. But something strange happened during the cleanup. A neighbor found a charred, half-melted photograph stuck to a nearby fence. It showed Buddy seated at a table with a man who had a distinctive scar, possibly the same man from Jenkins's account. No one could identify him. The photo was sent to a music historian in Chicago named Anthony Garrison for authentication. Garrison went silent days after receiving it. His office was cleared out within a week. Friends say he boarded a flight to Mexico and never returned. His email accounts were deactivated. Phone numbers disconnected. Was this coincidence? Or were people being silenced even half a century later? If Buddy Holly was indeed threatened before his final flight, and if there were witnesses to that moment, then someone had gone to great lengths to bury them. Just like the songs, the tapes, the royalties, and maybe even Buddy himself. It was all vanishing, one mystery at a time. In 2011, a dusty pawn shop in Omaha, Nebraska, became the unlikely epicenter of what may be the most chilling piece of the Buddy Holly mystery. A man calling himself Curtis Walton walked in with an old cardboard box. Inside were a few scratched-up 45s, a guitar strap, and a single reel-to-reel tape labeled in faded ink. BH Final. The shop owner didn't think much of it and set it aside for scrap. But a local DJ and record collector named Jamie Conlon happened to be browsing that day. He noticed the reel and bought it for $10, thinking it might contain forgotten country demos. When Conlon played the reel, everything stopped. It began with Buddy strumming his guitar in what sounded like a motel room. Bare walls, echo in the background. Then came a voice. Low, uncertain, unmistakably, Buddy Holly. "If you're hearing this," the voice said, "I didn't make it." He paused. The tape crackled. "They know about the label, about the sessions, about Sam. I saw the documents, and I shouldn't have. I thought music could save me, but they're not playing games. This industry, it ain't what you think. If I'm gone, tell Maria I tried. I tried." Then, a long silence. What followed was a song, slow, aching, almost unrecognizable compared to Buddy's earlier work. It was a confession in melody, a dirge for a man who knew he might not survive what he had uncovered. The lyrics were filled with vague warnings about contracts, manipulation, and voices in the dark. Conlon, stunned, called 2 experts to authenticate the real. One believed it was real. The other believed it was dangerous. The next week, Conlon's apartment was broken into. Only the real was taken. Shortly after, representatives from a major record company arrived with cease and desist letters claiming the recording violated estate rights. But no such clause had ever existed publicly. The tape hasn't resurfaced since. Some say it was destroyed. Others whisper that a copy still exists, hidden, protected by someone who knows just how deep this rabbit hole goes. And if Buddy Holly truly recorded a final message to the world, it wasn't just a farewell. It was a warning shot, one that was never meant to be played, but now can never be unheard. The story of Buddy Holly was supposed to end with a plane crash, a frozen field, a closed casket, and a nation mourning a young man taken too soon. That's the version carved into the history books. Clean, simple, tragic. But what if that's not how it really ended? What if the final chapter wasn't about bad weather or pilot error, but about secrets Buddy Holly was never supposed to reveal? From the missing tapes to the altered crash reports, from the whispered warnings to the fire that silenced a janitor, every breadcrumb leads back to one haunting possibility. Buddy Holly didn't just die, he was silenced. His dream of artistic independence threatened the very machine that profited off his voice. His decision to walk away from contracts, to expose corruption, to tell the truth about the industry he helped build, may have cost him everything. And those closest to him, left behind in a trail of grief and unanswered questions. A widow cut off from royalties, a father denied the right to grieve properly, a brother robbed of the last recordings, and a legacy reshaped by the very people Buddy had come to distrust. Today, Buddy Holly's music still plays on jukeboxes, in vintage diners, in films that try to capture the innocence of a bygone era. But behind those catchy riffs and timeless lyrics lies a deeper story, one the industry never wanted you to hear. A story of power, silence, and fear. A story where truth was traded for nostalgia. Because when a young man with a guitar threatens to change the system doesn't always clap back. Sometimes, it simply makes him disappear and writes a song about how sad it all was. But now, after decades buried under red tape and rumor, the mystery of Buddy Holly isn't just echoing in conspiracy circles or locked away in pawn shop vaults. It's alive. It's unraveling. And with every uncovered tape, every photo, every voice that refuses to stay quiet, the truth gets louder. The music never died, but it was almost buried with him.